Welcome and thank you for joining me, Anne-Marie Yarbrough, for the Social Studies Gradual Release Model. Today we are going to look at the I do, we do, you do, and we've added two bookends, the hook and the reflect piece, to make sure that we can align our practices with the best instructional practices of hooking kids, engaging them, and also giving them an opportunity to reflect and demonstrate their learning. Before we get started, I need you to take a few minutes and I want you to open the presentation, tinyurl.com /SSGRMDWD. I need you to follow along and participate and complete the Google form at the end. Let's get started. Okay, let's start with the hook. The hook is really there to grab our students' attentions, build interest, and make connections. So a couple of ways a couple of ideas that we can use as a hook is we can use a video for kids, we can use a book, we can look at primary and secondary sources. Really, a video getting kids hooked is a great way to engage them using artifacts like the ballot box over in the lower right hand corner. Visuals, pictures, maps, charts, graphs, artifacts, anything in order to engage the students. To let them get ready and excited. One thing that I didn't add on here that we could add is a guiding question for the day. So let's look at this. Where, the what, the where, and the how. So if we think about where or primary and secondary sources, I really encourage you guys to check out ClassLink, the library resource folder, National Geographic Kids, Britannica, Culturegrams, internet resources such as the National Archives, Stanford History Education Group has some great visuals, poems, news articles. Again, ClassLink, the library resource folder for either junior high or high school. Click on there and any of the Gale literary resources. Also, look at your school library, Epic, and Unite for Literacy. All right, let's keep going. So, if you think about primary and secondary sources in the form of artifacts, think of, a virtual museum or history tour, a photo, an object, an old cell phone. And then think about your videos and your music and your song. You've got National Kids, you've got Culturegrams, you've got YouTube, TeacherTube. Just be careful with YouTube and TeacherTube. Make sure you preview it. So if you think about here's the what, here's where you can find it, and then here in the last column are some ways that you can utilize it. Project those visuals through Zoom, Google Classroom. If you've got a secondary actual print, you can read in person through Zoom, YouTube breakout rooms with your replicas, discuss, explore, build curiosity, ask them to compare and contrast something from, history to today. How does it impact our current life if it had never been invented? And then, obviously, if you've got your music, your songs, and your video, play them, embed them in an interactive processing activity like Poll Anywhere. Sorry. Okay, so as we think about this, we've got our hook. This is the engagement. So let's practice. What I want you to do right now is I want you to actually watch the video, participate in the poll, use the voting buttons up or down to vote on the answers that you agree or disagree. And I'm going to give you a few minutes to do that. Welcome back and thank you for participating in our Poll Anywhere. Let's move on. Let's look at our next part of our gradual release model, the mini lesson. So today we are going to learn about another civic responsibility, voting. As you can see, today is election day, and we wanted to really frame our thinking for something that was relevant. Again, when you think about the mini lesson, you're thinking about how do we convey the content and we model the thinking for students. So we reflect on the launch activity, the hook, we state the purpose, we state the learning objective. Sometimes it's teacher directed, sometimes we model our thinking. There's times where we ask and answer questions. We connect this to prior learning. We clarify misconceptions. So if we look at this right here, voting makes people part of government. In a democracy, people have the right to choose their leaders on election days. Citizens vote to choose their leaders for the state, city, and country. Again, with this mini lesson, this is where we're really working with the content and we're getting the information transferred from the dynamic in order for it to become where students can process it. So, as we think about how, as teachers, do we craft the ID part, we have to start with our TEKs. So, what are our TEKs for this lesson? And obviously, we're going to go into our TEKs resource system. We're going to look at our IFD. We're going to look at our field guide. That's going to help us craft the what. Where do we find this? We find it in our pacing tools. We find it in library resource folder. We find it, in the amazing things that you guys have already done. So how? How do we do the mini lesson through, how does that look in the classroom? Well, this can be your demonstration of learning. It can be a presentation, modeling activity expectations, and model thinking. So as we practice, I want to take you through, and as a teacher, I'm going to model analyzing the timeline. So today, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to look at the history of voting in America. As you can see, this timeline begins in 1776, where voting is controlled by individual state legislatures, and only white men 21 years and older who own land could vote. And as we progress through, I see that we've got the 14th Amendment. Remind me, students, when did the 14th Amendment happen after what major event? The Civil War, right. So what did the 14th and 15th do, and how did they contribute to voting in America? And I'm going to step out as the teacher, and obviously, as the teacher, we would go through each major component of this. We would talk about it. We would talk about, the components of how this impacted voting in America today. So, we've looked at the hook. How do we get kids engaged? We've looked at a mini lesson. We've had a little bit of practice with both. Now, let's talk about the we do. This is really the teacher and the students. This is the group activity analysis. We create a graphic organizer with the class. You can explain it orally. You've got partners. You've got turn and talk, stations, sorts, anchor charts with class. So here, basically, it's for our part today, we are going to do a group activity. So what I want you to do as we look at it, and actually let me give you the what, where, and how. So what, you can create anchor charts, graphic organizers, turn and talks, group activities, etc. We do have examples of those in our pacing tools. You can also, as a PLC, design these engaging lessons based upon our TEKs. So how do we do the we do? It can be whole group, small group, stations, partners, and we really want to encourage you to utilize the technology and the chats, the breakouts, poll anywhere, and even using I believe the surveys or the polls within Zoom. Those are really fun to do with kids. So let's practice. So what I want you to do, and what I would have you do as students, is I would assign you into groups of 4 and assign you into breakouts. And then what I would have you do in your groups of your breakout rooms, I would have you sort and drag the significant voting events into categories. So, for example, if I see that white men over 21, white men may be a category. If I go to 1920 and I see women, the right to vote, I may have a category for women. The key here is to have students justify how your group determined each event for each category. So pick a category to summarize the events and why they are significant. So basically, what we've just done, we've taken the content of the whole group, and now we've asked students to process. We've asked them to categorize the history of voting in America from 1776 through today into categories, justify how each component fits within that category, and then as a group, they have to summarize the events and why they're significant in U.S. history. Okay, We've looked at the hook, we've looked at the I do, we've looked at the we do. Now it's time to transition to the independent work of the you do. This can be suggested formative assessments. You can write, you can draw, you can act out, you can do stations, sorts, activities. There's a plethora of things that we can have students do to really see if they are gauging their learning. Again, a repeat of what the examples are, where you can find them, and then how you can do them. One of the things that I want you guys to do as independent practice, I want you to think about how we've utilized this timeline from the I do, the we do, and now we're looking at it from the you do. So now independently, what I want you to do is I want you to look at all the events in history from 1776 to the present, and I want you to think about which of these events, had it not happened, would have impacted you most as a voter had it not happened. So let me just repeat. Of all the sequence of events depicting voting rights in the United States, pick one that would have impacted you the most had it not happened. Justify your answer with historical and current evidence. So, for example, I'm going to pick the 1920, the 19th Amendment. Had the 19th Amendment never happened, I would not have the right to vote. And then I would go on to justify my answer with historical and current evidence. So that's an example, ladies and gentlemen, of how we've looked at the I do, we do, you do. We've had the flip. So in closing, as all good teachers, we want to look at closing our lesson with a check for understanding, a sum up for learning, tying it back to the learning objective, and using our exit tickets. And as you remember, we looked at, and our learning objective is to look at our rights and responsibilities. So we've looked at the history of voting in America from 1776 to the present. And as you think about it, we've got Jamboards, Kahoots, Padlets, Flipgrid. If you click this link, you can go to the social studies playlist. And at Lead Forward, they also have a virtual playlist. Finally, you did it. You made it. In order to get credit for today, you must complete this Google form with your reflections. And don't forget, today is Election Day. Your vote counts 2020.